This is Word on the Reef, where marine science meets adventure. Join Tanya Murphy and Brett Goodban as we plunge into the wonders of the Great Barrier Reef and explore the mysteries beneath the waves. Yes, good morning everyone and welcome to Word on the Reef. I'm your host, diver and marine conservationist Tanya Murphy, and joining me as always is marine educator and fellow ocean enthusiast Brett Goodban.
Good morning. Hello everybody.
Today is, of course, Anzac Day, a solemn occasion where we pause to remember Australians and New Zealanders who served in the defence of our countries. My grandfather served in World War II. He survived, but sadly 3 of his brothers didn't make it home. Do you have any veterans in your family, Brett?
Yeah, so both grandparents on both sides served, some in Europe and some in Australia. My amazing nephew graduated as a naval officer, and a very special young lady in our lives at the moment is part of the Naval Cadets and did her Anzac March this morning, so we're super proud.
Anzac Day is a powerful reminder of the sacrifices past generations made to protect our amazing country. And that raises the question, what are we doing now to protect this amazing country and especially all its natural wonders for future generations that follow us? How will they remember us for the actions we're taking now? So speaking of that, we're now just 1 week away from the Australian federal election. Early voting is already open and Australians head to the polls officially on Saturday the 3rd of May. And as we mentioned last week, some are calling this election the Reef's last real chance because if we don't make big cuts to emissions this decade, we may not get another shot in time to save it. And the decisions made in the next term of government, especially around climate targets and accelerating the shift to renewables, will determine a lot of the future of the Great Barrier Reef. So today we've put together a bit of an election special for our lucky listeners. Later in the show, we'll be joined by Maria Poulos Conklin, Head of Government Relations at the Australian Conservation Foundation. She'll break down how the major parties score on their climate and environmental commitments. And spoiler alert, you might be surprised by some of the results. If you're still on the fence about who to vote for, especially when it comes to protecting our environment, stick around. You won't want to miss it. But first, let's kick things off with our first guest, Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phil? Geez, we've done all right.
Not the American TV psychologist. This one's a local legend, Dr. Phillip Musumeci, the Greens candidate for Leichhardt. And just a quick note, I've reached out to all major candidates for this seat. That includes Labor's Matt Smith and LNP's Jeremy Neal, inviting them to come on the show and share their reef policies with you, our listeners. I haven't heard back from all of them just yet, but the invitation's still out there, so hopefully we'll hear back from them. I'd love to have them on next week's show.
Yeah.
Of course, we know it's a frantic time for all candidates in the final lead up to the election, so we're just especially grateful that Phillip could spare the time to chat with us today. Now, Phil grew up on his family's sugarcane farm in Babinda, just south of Cairns, and now lives in Cairns with his wife and son. He's a computer scientist and engineer who's taught thousands of students at JCU and other universities, and he's also a prolific inventor. He's even helped invent a space laser.
Stop it.
But back in the 90s, Phil helped modernise the sugar milling industry with electronic tech that transformed the way mills operate. A pretty big deal when you think about how important the sugarcane industry is for Far North Queensland. These days, he's working on self-driving industrial vehicles. But one of the coolest things, in my opinion, is that Phil was part of the team that invented one of the first marine life data loggers used by the Marine Park Authority on the Great Barrier Reef. This early technology helped monitor the activity of tube worms as an indicator of reef health. Do you know what a tube worm is, Brett?
Oh, do I what? I have spent thousands of hours staring at them, hoping they'll pop out and then pop back in. So any divers out there will know you have the massive boulder corals, and some of them can get up to the size of a house. They're huge. But these little calcium structures that come out like a flower are all colours of the rainbow. And actually they can live for about 40 years. They're just incredible. And they also have been known to help corals' growth around where they live. And in turn of them popping out of those boulder corals, as they pop out, they actually knock the tube feet off the crown of thorns to knock them off the boulder coral.
Wow.
And will help support life. They're just amazing. So, yeah, anyone who's been diving knows a Christmas tree worm. You waste a lot of air looking at them.
Okay, well, Christmas tree worms are one of the types, but I think there's a few different types of tube worms as
lots.
well.
Yep.
And when you swim past them, they often retract back inside their little tubes. And that's one of the things that they were monitoring with this early tech. And this was back before camera traps were invented. So, you know, a lot of people might think they're not particularly interested in the activity of tube worms, but that was one of the earliest reef health measuring devices on the reef, and that laid the foundation for the data loggers that are still in use today for purposes like logging water quality and temperatures on the reef. How cool is that?
Well, we all know the animals are going to tell us, aren't they?
That's true.
You know, they know it better than we do.
That is very true. We need to pay close attention to the messages that we're getting from nature, whether it is from tube worms or not. But what we're really keen to find out today is, what are the Greens' plans to protect the Great Barrier Reef? Because while they're still considered a minor party, the Greens do have a significant influence in Parliament. And here in Queensland, Greens Senator Larissa Waters is up for re-election. So this is an important moment to consider their policies, especially with regard to protecting the reef. If you've just tuned in, today is an Australian election special. We're going to help you get informed about each party's reef protection policies before you head to the polls. And our first guest today is Greens candidate for Leichhardt, Dr Phillip Musumeci. And of course, we'll be talking reef policy with him. But first, I just had to ask Phil about something a little more out of this world. We've all heard of people dumping rubbish into our oceans. But did you know we're also polluting space? It turns out old satellites and space debris are starting to clutter up the sky. And Phil worked on an invention to help clean it up. A space laser.
Oh, cool.
to help deal with orbital junk. So here's what he had to say.
So the idea was for about 15 minutes a time, because that's how long you get usually to see a piece of junk in the sky as it moves across the sky. You keep pulsing your laser at that for little 15-minute bursts. You do that for about 2 to 3 weeks. And eventually that piece of junk will get a speed of about 2 centimeters a week. And I know that sounds extremely slow, but you're finished with that piece of junk. It's now going to just drift away.
And becomes Mars's problem or the moon's problem.
You could say that. But anyway, the important thing is they're about 200 meters away from the geostationary orbit, and that's enough. By the way, this would not be a problem if people would just park their satellites in the proper place when they're finished using them.
Report them online. You know that there's those Facebook groups for the Kansas worst parkers. Yeah.
Right.
If you've got a satellite emblazoned with a country's logo, name and shame them for poor parking.
Well, it is a problem. You know, there's this urge to keep using communication satellites right to the very end when they run out of propellant. Of course, if they run out of propellant, they're stuck. And there's agreements of best practice, but they're not always.
So people should be using the last energy of their satellite to move it out of the way.
Oh, yeah.
Well, obviously, people were funding this program because space junk is becoming a big problem. So it's exciting to know that you worked as part of that project, and hopefully they keep going forward and can clean up the space junk in future.
Or at least not make more. You know, people are at least becoming a bit aware now. I mean, this idea that you can just keep polluting the place, it's very much a down-to-earth problem as well. But, you know, we see people not looking to the future and just discarding their rubbish in inappropriate ways everywhere.
What inspired you to be active with the Greens and ultimately run for Parliament?
There was 3 things. One was, there was a time when there was a report to the Army which talked about misogyny in the Army. And David Morrison gave a talk which went viral on YouTube about people in the Army having to step up, and whenever they saw something that was unacceptable, they were not allowed to walk past it. They had to do something about it. And his magic phrase was, whatever you walk by, you are accepting. And that really echoed in my mind. But then the other thing that got me going was Richard Di Natale. He's an ex-leader of the Greens. He wrote a lot about sustainability. And one of the things that got me with his writing was he kept saying, we can have a sustainable income, but we won't have to do without things. There'll be a sense of abundance or a sense of having enough. The aim is to have just a good life. And his idea about a good life, that triggered an understanding for me. And then after COP21, I read, almost a thesis by Pope Francis called On the Common Good. And the whole document is about ecology and how you have to have respect for nature, how you have to have respect for plants and animals. And the fundamental message there I got from that was that we have a responsibility of stewardship over the natural world.
Are you a Catholic, Phil?
No, I'm agnostic. But the clarity in the voice in that piece about our need to look after our world, that helped me on my way. Those people, basically they say to me, you can't just ignore things if you've got the ability to do something about it.
Let's talk about the reef now. What will you do, if elected, to help protect the Great Barrier Reef?
Well, one of the big efforts that the Greens announced in December last year was improvement of water quality. And at that time, there was an announcement saying we were going to invest $4 billion, but $2 billion of that was on water quality, and it is over 25 years. What we're saying here is we've got to try and improve the runoff onto the reef over that period. There has been some work done in trying to have a water quality plan over that period, so we've got to fund that work. And an important element of this would be land care. That is, we're trying to work with farmers, for example, and reduce runoff. And oftentimes the things that we would like farmers to do are things that farmers would probably like to do anyway. Things like losing less topsoil. And in fact, there's a big effort in the Greens for regenerative agriculture in the country Greens. And then the other aspect is the chemical content as well. And I happen to work in the precision navigation world these days. And what we see happening in farming now is that it is possible for farmers who are, for example, using fertilizer to deliver that fertilizer at different levels across a field based on the actual needs of the plants in a certain point. So they're able to deliver fertilizer in a way that should not have any excess put in and therefore reduces the amount that might run off. So that precision agriculture is something that we would be promoting in that land care program.
We know that the biggest threat to the Great Barrier Reef is climate change, so it's great to see that the Greens have a policy to deliver 100% renewable energy by 2030 in Australia and phase out coal and gas, including exports. But there was one wind farm project slated for Far North Queensland in recent years, which ended up getting rejected because it was really close to a World Heritage Area. So how do you think we can get to 100% renewables as quickly as we need to save the reef, whilst making sure these projects are appropriate and safe for nature and for communities?
Well, as a start, I guess a rule of thumb would be don't go putting any kind of project, renewable energy or whatever, right next to World Heritage areas. But in more general ways, actually going out and seeking areas that are appropriate for renewable energy. If you looked at New South Wales, their West Ozana Renewable Energy Zone, they went out looking for farming areas. They were particularly looking at grazing areas because their idea was, well, if we can put, say, wind farms or solar panels in an area where there's already been a loss of the original vegetation, we're minimising ecological harm and we're still maximising, the benefit of having lower pollution energy sources. So that thinking is starting to happen in Queensland. For example, west of Gladstone, there are some wind farm projects there that are they're not in World Heritage areas for a start. And west of Townsville or west of Charters Stowers, really, there are some projects going ahead there where the area itself may be grazing land. So from a farmer's point of view, there might be a supplementary income. Meanwhile, we get access to sunshine or wind. And in the last year or so, there's been some work with solar panels being co-located on grazing areas where merinos are grazing. And if you put them in an area with solar panels at appropriate distances, then they benefit from shade in the middle of the day. And it turns out that the dew in the morning lasts a bit longer when there's shade in the morning as well. So the sheep end up earning about 18% more for the farmer.
Yeah, so I read about that online as well. And lots of farmers are swearing by it. You just run your sheep underneath the solar panels. The sheep have shade. The grass is greener and more healthy for the sheep. They produce better wool, and the sheep mow the lawn for you. So there's there's no maintenance on your solar panel areas. So I want to get back to the reef. So we know the reef is currently bleaching, and it's the 6th time in under a decade to have a mass bleaching event. So do you think this could be grounds for declaring a national emergency, and maybe would you support an emergency response?
Well, in the Greens, we do think that these kinds of events are an emergency. What we've been saying is if you have bushfires every 3 years, say, then eventually there's something catastrophically wrong with that environment. And so we would apply the same logic to the ocean. Of course, what's different here is people aren't seeing it. They're not living in that reef. So we've got this problem that people are not aware of some of these events. And I would just look across to people that are studying the reef, and if they're telling us that this is extremely unusual, then that sounds like a prompt for more action.
Climate change isn't just impacting the Great Barrier Reef, it's also making extreme weather events like floods worse, and our community in Cairns has been hit hard. Hundreds of people were affected by Cyclone Jasper in 2023. What impact did that flood have on you, Phil?
In my case, I had a mudslide at the side of my house. It took me 2 or 3 days to dig a gap between the mud and the side of my house, so that was a bit of a wake-up call. But, worse was I was looking out over one of the floodplains of the Barron River, watching people in Camarunga villas basically leaving their homes. There was a lot of disaster where I live in Caravonica. It was a pretty, just generally terrible event. And actually, you can walk around in Camarunga villas now, or you can walk around in bits of Holloway's Beach now, and we've got areas of our city that are essentially unrepaired. I don't know if the people had no insurance. I mean, there will have been situations like that, or simply that there's been so much work required that jobs just haven't been done. My backyard is still a bit of a moving disaster, quite literally. And I know friends in Machins who, I got a lovely friend. Her house was flooded. A bunch of us went over there and we pressure cleaned its floor. In the end, it turned out she couldn't live in it anyway because there were other concerns with the water that had gone through that house. And lately I heard her say that, we're a bit more than a year on. She's just decided that she's not going to live there anymore anyway. She's just worn out.
Cost of living is a big issue this election, and some of the ways that impacts us in Far North Queensland is due to climate disasters like Cyclone Jasper, which saw hundreds of people being impacted. We've also got soaring insurance premiums because of increasing climate disasters. But another one is obviously access to cheap, clean energy like rooftop solar. So how would you help Cairns locals and renters access cheap, clean energy like rooftop solar?
There's a proposal that renters will be able to get loans to pay off solar panels on a roof, and the owner of the building will have the option of not paying for those panels, which is fair enough. They've got their investment working. We're not trying to mess things up for them. But at a later stage, if they, for example, sell the building, then what that owner can do is they can say, okay, what's the residual value of these panels? It might be relatively low. So for a fairly small price, they might be able to take on full ownership of those panels and then sell a building that's got solar panels on it. But in the interim period, we've got a way for a renter to have access to a battery grant and to gain the benefits of a battery, and we haven't interfered with the rights of the owner.
Have you ever been out and seen coral bleaching happen, or at least seen pictures of it? And how does that make you feel?
The aspect that I find hard to handle is the arbitrary or senseless loss of something in nature. You see something gone and you know that we could have made some decisions differently that need not have caused that, and we would have been no worse off. I mean, it's just sad. And the sense of needless loss, that's really irritating.
Absolutely.
I hate us doing stupid things.
Senseless loss also frustrates me. Scientists have known about climate change for, I think, over 100 years. They've been raising the alarm about it increasingly over recent decades, and a lot of the time on deaf ears. So if governments had have actually got together a lot earlier and agreed to transition away from fossil fuels, that these coral bleachings that we're seeing right now could have been prevented is probably the most frustrating thing. We could have 100% prevented this, and it wouldn't require us giving up having nice things. Like, we could have nice things with renewable energy.
That is Richard Di Natale's basic philosophy. You can have a good life, but you have to have a long-term view. Humans are animals and they need a place to live, and it's got to be able to sustain them. I'm not sure why people think that we don't need to care about humans and other animals in our environment. They all need somewhere safe.
We are not separate from the environment. We're part of it, which is something that if people were to listen to the traditional owners of this country, that they would definitely understand. But as a parent, how concerned are you for, seeing amazing wonders like the Great Barrier Reef and the rainforest being threatened by climate change?
We want to be relentlessly positive about how we can restore and preserve our environment. We want those future generations to have a chance of a good life like us. We've been very lucky. We've got to keep it possible for future generations to have those experiences as well.
Phillip Musumeci, Australian Greens candidate for Leichhardt. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. If you've just tuned in, welcome to our Australian election special here on Word on the Reef. If you're still on the fence about which party has the strongest plans to protect the reef, stick around, because up next, we're diving into a deep analysis of where each major party stands on climate and environmental policy. Joining us is someone who knows the ins and outs of this better than just about anyone, Maria Poulos Conklin, Head of Government Relations at the Australian Conservation Foundation. Maria has worked in foreign affairs and crisis management for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, with postings in France, Sri Lanka and Mauritius, and served as a peace monitor in Bougainville after the civil conflict. Maria is also the founder of the Save the Bay Coalition, which campaigns for biodiversity and heritage protection in Sydney. At the Australian Conservation Foundation, Maria has helped produce a comprehensive election scorecard, comparing how each political party stacks up on climate and environmental commitments. And spoiler alert, some of the results may shock you.
Yes.
Good morning, Maria, and thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. Let's start with a little bit of background. For listeners who aren't familiar with the Australian Conservation Foundation, or ACF, can you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, so I'm here on behalf of the Australian Conservation Foundation. We're Australia's oldest national environment organisation. We were founded in 1965. And today we are a community of over 700,000 people, and we're united by a commitment to protect the places and the wildlife that we love. Now, my role, I'm the Parliamentary Relations Manager, or as you said, the Head of Government Relations. My job is to basically camp out at Parliament House when there are sittings and help our wonderful campaigners and policy experts engage with politicians, MPs, parties, and do activities and advocacy at Parliament House, and also engage with government and just bring some cohesion to how we do that. And, you know, for my sins, I was also tasked with coming up with ACF's election scorecard, which we do for every election. It's a very involved process, which I'm really happy to be telling you about today.
Yeah, that's just so helpful, that scorecard. It's great.
Yes, Brett and I have been having a close look at it, and it is very interesting. But before we dive into how the political parties scored on their environmental policies, why is this election such an important moment for our natural environment, including our threatened species, ecosystems, and, of course, the Great Barrier Reef?
Yes, this is the crucial decade for climate and nature. It's a moment of reckoning for our coral reefs. And we really need to stop pouring fuel on the climate fire. And the science tells us we don't have time to wait. This next Parliament must take bold action if we want to protect the places and the people and the creatures that we love. So it's crucial because we need to slash climate pollution fast and build a 21st century energy system based on renewable energy that will power jobs and communities across the country. Yeah. And if we don't cut emissions and transition, the Great Barrier Reef will continue to decline. So it's well and good to have monitoring of the Great Barrier Reef, but we really need solutions. Yeah. And we really need to fix our broken environment laws so they actually stop the destruction of habitat and species loss. So, we have a window. This is why we've done this. It's crucial because decisions made in the next 3 years will set the path for decades, and the window is closing fast, and we see this election as being the moment. It's about protecting our kids' futures. It's about protecting the reef. It's about protecting all the places of Channel Country. It's really important that the next 3 years changes things for nature and climate.
It's really going to be pivotal because it's going to take us through until almost the end of the decade, which is, like you said, it's crunch time for the Great Barrier Reef and other climate-affected ecosystems. So let's talk about the election scorecard now. You and the ACF team have reviewed and ranked the major parties' climate and environment policies. How did you measure each party's performance? What was your approach?
So I'll just start by saying we created it because, Australians deserve transparency, and so many people who care deeply about the environment, they feel overwhelmed when it comes to understanding what politicians are actually doing, right? So, and then, as I just said, the nature and climate crisis is right here and right now, and the most powerful thing Australians can do to avoid the worst is to vote for politicians with a plan, a plan to cut pollution, to restore nature and transition to renewables. So we built the scorecard, and it's a research-driven, nonpartisan tool that cuts through the political spin. And what we did was we looked at 54 detailed tests of success. That's just another way of saying, what are the 54 policies that matter? What is good policy? We looked at that, and they were centred around 4 major themes. One was saving nature, and that's like who has the best policies to fix our broken nature laws and to invest in nature and deforestation. The second theme was championing renewables. Who is committing to building more renewables faster in the right locations and to advocate for well-planned faster closures of coal-fired plants and phase out gas, right? And who has science-aligned 2035 targets. Then the other 2 tests were stopping the climate wreckers. Which of the parties and candidates is actually advocating to stop new coal and gas approvals and make Australia renewable manufacturing and export superpower and have no new subsidies for coal and gas. And finally, was rejecting nuclear, because we see nuclear as dangerous, polluting, expensive, and a distraction.
Yeah.
So they were the 4 tests, and then we surveyed all the candidates on all our tests and analysed their public commitments, their performance in Parliament in the last term, and also what they're saying they'll do in the next Parliament. Who we scored was the major parties, obviously, the Coalition, Labor and the Greens. Then we did all the incumbent independents, all those the Teals and the other regional community independents, and Bob Catter and Diet Lay and all the others in different city seats, and a bunch of independent candidates that are running for the first time. And we did that in areas where we saw a particularly interesting contest or where we have a very strong local community presence, because obviously our supporters are very interested in those candidates. And we did the analysis, we sent them the interim results, we invited them to engage with the interim results that we came up with, and that was their opportunity to lift ambition and to make more commitments. And then we basically finalised the score, and we have 3 tools. We have a snapshot scorecard, which shows ticks and crosses and how well they're doing against those 4 tests. And we also have a digital tool online where you can enter your party candidate and see how they compare across the 16 outcomes, like nature laws and climate pollution and all those things I just talked about.
Wow.
And so that's how we did it. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say how helpful that is, because I'm education manager at the Cairns Aquarium, and we have over 1,000 people a day at the moment with school holidays. It's been really busy and it's been great. And I do the coral education shows and shark shows and talk about the environment every day. And I've been mentioning this because the biggest question I'm getting at the moment from my customers is, thank you for teaching us the real story. We want to care for the environment, but we're just so confused as to who we want to vote for, which is the biggest question, right?
And the politicians don't really help because they tell you confusing things on purpose.
That's right. They can't answer a question, and that's that's what you want. So I've been talking to them and mentioning this scorecard and said, look, this is available for you guys to have a look at. It drowns out all the noise and it gives you the proper answers as to who's going to do the right thing, and then it will point you in the direction you want to go in. And the response I've had from customers this week has been incredible compared to the last election, because they now know that this is the most important election that our reef and environment can have. So it's very helpful.
Yeah, and it sounds like you did a tremendous amount of work, Maria. It must have been a big project, and it sounds like it's really thorough.
Big team working on it. Yeah, really, we did it very comprehensively, because I think it's very important to have that credibility behind the results, because not everyone is pleased with the results often. So it has to be robust. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, now is the moment we've all been waiting for, the big unveil. Maria, how did the parties score?
Who would you like me to start with?
Well, there's a standout headline for me when I looked at the full results. There is a party which scored only 1 point out of 100.
1 point out of 100. He's doing all right.
Yeah, they did very well. The Coalition scored 1%. And now that's the lowest score we've ever recorded. And like I said before, we've done this over many elections, and their score has ranged from they did get 4% once up to something like 20%, and this is the lowest. And the reason is they have no credible plans to cut climate pollution. Their platform is built on expanding gas, providing subsidies and funding to the gas industry, slashing environmental protections, and promoting nuclear energy. And ACF's position is that nuclear energy is deeply expensive, risky, and slow to deploy. It's a slow to deploy distraction from a real solution. Right? And the solution is renewable energy, and we want a renewable future, not a radioactive future. And the other thing is they voted against every law to cut climate pollution in the last parliament, and their policies we've calculated, and the Climate Council backs us in, would increase pollution by at least 6.3 billion tonnes. Or was it last week, Dutton could not even answer a question.
Oh, yeah, we highlighted that in our show. Yeah, I nearly fell off my chair. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist. Well, I'm not a scientist either, but I do listen to scientists, and it's a classic climate-denying response to say I'm not a scientist. And it's just not acceptable for a party or a senior political leader to claim they don't know the risks Australians are facing. I mean, especially if you're vying to be Prime Minister, not to have educated yourself thoroughly about the science. And so their positions for us are just totally regressive, and they're avoiding action. And so for us, the coalition's policies would make the climate crisis worse. So we could not do anything but give them 1%, and we've invited them to engage with us and commit to, try to improve their score, but at the moment it stays at 1%.
So they have on the bottom of their report card from primary school, room for improvement.
Room for improvement, again.
Massively.
And so, just drawing that back to the reef, with that amount of extra pollution in the atmosphere that you mentioned, Maria, I kind of imagine what that would spell for the Great Barrier Reef, which is currently in the middle of its 6th mass bleaching event in 9 years. But I guess the ALP are not completely off the hook with their score as well. How did the Labor Party score on the scorecard?
So they got a bare pass. We scored them 54%. Now, the thing with the ALP, they've made strong progress on renewables and clean energy manufacturing, and they have said no to nuclear power. They have unlocked, $87 billion of public and private investment in renewable power, storage and transmission, and they have set strict limits on industrial polluters, and they did create the vehicle standards to ensure new cars use less petrol and release less pollution. But unfortunately for them, that progress has been undermined by their continued support for new coal and gas projects and their failure to deliver on nature law reform. Labor's approved 26 coal, oil and gas development, and just last week, the biggest, dirtiest gas project in Australia, the Barossa, was approved, and that threatens to emit a whopping 270 million tonnes of CO2 into the atmosphere over the life of the project. And this is during an election campaign, which shows the direction we're heading in with the ALP as well. And they promised to fix Australia's broken environment laws coming into the last parliament, but they ended the term by weakening them instead by creating, I don't know if you followed the salmon industry saga in Tasmania, where they basically carved out a special exemption for the salmon industry. So that is a real backsliding, and it's very disappointing. There's a lot of potential there, but we've seen so much backsliding, and we said to them, if they commit to nature law reform in this campaign, this election campaign, and a timeline for nature law reform, they could up their score, but we unfortunately haven't received a response to that. So they get 54%, and we hope that we at least get, in the first 100 days, some stronger commitments than we have right now.
Yeah, wow. So 54%, well, it's a bare pass. It's 54 times better than what the LNP got, though. How about the Greens then, Maria?
Well, the Greens scored very well. They got a high distinction, 98%.
Oh, nice job.
Yeah, I mean, they've committed to halting deforestation. They've committed to funding nature. They want to see 1% of the federal budget going to nature. They support transition to renewables. And their agenda, when you read it on their website, it's very ambitious. It's science-based. And they supported every single climate bill in the last parliament. And they also secured a number of important amendments, including placing a hard cap on climate pollution and protecting clean energy investment from future rollbacks. So all round, they performed very well in the last parliament, and their commitments are very strong. So they got a very good score from us.
Wow, okay. So that's pretty much speaks for itself, 98%.
Massive, isn't it?
And there's another party which has its stomping ground up here in Far North Queensland, which is the Qatar Australia Party. How did they rate?
Yeah, so look, I'll start by saying, we also did all the Teal Independents, and they also scored very highly for their strong science-based commitments to climate and nature, and they've all made very valuable contributions to strengthening climate action and to get greater household electrification support in the last parliament. So they've all gotten scores in the 80s and 90s.
That's really important. I should have asked you about that because we do have listeners across Australia on our online podcast as well. So thanks for letting us know about those Teal independents.
Yeah.
Yeah, like have a look at their results because their influence, if re-elected, is expected to grow in the likely event of a hung parliament as well. So we thought scoring them would be really important. But we also scored Bob Katter and Jai and other more conservative independents. And unfortunately, Bob didn't engage with our survey. We did a thorough, search of his website and his voting record in Parliament, and we just, I hate to say this, he did worse than the Liberal Party because at least they engaged with our survey. He got 0%.
Zero? Wow.
0%.
Crikey.
And look, I did a little bit of research before this program. I looked up your local candidate, Daniel Collins, and I got a little bit excited by it because I saw, he's an ecologist and, he's got a background in human rights and land management and, and then I read a bit more and he actually wants to open up the Cape for more grazing and forestry and, he wants to do it sustainably and he sees, planting more trees in state forests as a climate solution, which is great. But advocating for more forestry in a World Heritage area is not aligned to what we are advocating and our policies and priorities. But I do invite Daniel to engage with us if he wants to talk about his climate policies and nature policies. There's still time to improve his score, but unfortunately we can only give the Katter Australia Party and Bob Katter 0 at this point.
Well, there you have it, folks. So to sum up, the LNP 1%, ALP 54%, Greens 98%, Katter Australia Party 0% on their scores for protecting the environment and acting on climate. And we know that polls consistently show that the majority of Australians care deeply about climate change and want to see stronger action to protect our environment. So as we are the ones that are hiring these people, it's interesting to see how many are not actually responding to those wishes.
I've just been shaking my head for about 5 minutes. I just don't understand it. I don't. And that's the bonus of our shows. We can connect with everyone from every walk of life. And I hope that our listeners of Word on the Reef, what is this now, our 8th show?
Something like that.
Like that. It's flying. Have been able to find that connection that we've been bringing across about our environment and our reef and our life experience and everything. And we hope that this will steer you in the right direction,
Absolutely. So obviously it's everyone's individual choice, but people can't make a choice if they are confused by all of the sort of misinformation that politicians are throwing out there. So it's really good to have this sort of non-partisan science, fact-based comparison. And as I was saying, for young Australians who now make up the largest voting demographic, climate is one of their top 3 election issues.
Yes.
So Maria, why do you think we're not seeing more ambitious environmental policies from the 2 major parties?
It's a great question, and honestly, I think it comes down to a few things. One is the influence of powerful vested interests, particularly in the fossil and mining sectors. These industries have deep pockets and strong political connections, and unfortunately, that influence still shapes policy outcomes. And we saw it with the salmon industry corporations that led to the weakening of laws in that final sitting of the last parliament. Like, we have a special exemption for the salmon industry, and that has meant we have weakened our laws, not strengthened them in the last parliament. Another reason, I think, is also short-term thinking, because right now a lot of political debate is centred around the cost of living crisis, and that's really important. People are suffering right now, but I say what's often missing is the truth that the cost of living will be higher if we don't transition to renewables.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. So if we stay locked into fossil fuels, we'll see higher power bills and more natural disasters and more economic disruption.
Insurance bills.
Households that are uninsurable, including in Dutton's electorate. So it's really, really important that people see that there is cause and effect here, and the reason why they have high power bills is because we're locked into fossil fuels. And we also, just very finally, a final point, we have to recognise that our economy is dependent on nature, right? So research shows that around 47% of Australia's GDP is moderately to highly dependent on nature, and that means protecting ecosystems like the reef. And that isn't just good environment policy, it's smart economic policy.
That's a really good message.
Yeah, 64,000 full-time jobs depend on the Great Barrier Reef.
Yep, that's it.
And it's worth billions of dollars to the economy every year, and that's just the Great Barrier Reef. So there's farmers and tourism all over Australia depend on us taking action and protecting what we've got, in the same way that the Anzac soldiers protected what we've got. So that's all we have time for, actually, folks. But Maria Poulos Conklin, Head of Government Relations at the Australian Conservation Foundation, great to have you on the show today.
Thank you for your incrediable work.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and for allowing us to share the scorecard. And can I just quickly say acf.org.au/scorecard, that's where you can find it. Share it, talk about it, use it, and talk to your local candidates.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you to all the brave men, women and animals, both past and present, for their service and sacrifice in times of war and peacekeeping, lest we forget.